And obviously, we're continuing with the big story of the week, which is the firing of FBI Director James Comey. And one of the interesting dimensions of this whole issue is the way the right-wing media is looking at that firing. So we're going to talk about that now with Leah Weintraub. Leah is an expert in political communications. She works in that field here in Washington, D.C. She is also the co-author, I should say, of the Know Your Right, singular, newsletter. So first of all, Leah, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me on, RJ.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And look, let's start with a little bit of the lay of the land of the right-wing media on this issue. First of all, well, let's start with this, actually, since you do track the right-wing media. Their relationship with Trump seems to have evolved over the last year. There was a pro-Trump right-wing media. There was an anti-Trump right-wing media going into the Republican primaries. I get the feeling now that by and large, they're all pro-Trump. But am I wrong about that?
I think that a lot of outlets are becoming more pro-Trump as he tries to appeal to different segments of the conservative landscape. So I'm thinking about his nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. By and large, the entire conservative media landscape got behind it. So the populists, the traditionalists, the Christian right, they all approved of this decision because he is an establishment Republican. He goes back to a previous era of what we think conservatives look like. But on issues like Comey, we're seeing the divide come out. So there are certainly outlets that are going to be a rubber stamp for Trump. I'm thinking the Breitbarts, and the gateway pundits of the world. But then there are outlets that are going to be more critical of him. The National Review's landscape of Comey has been across the board. So it depends on the issue, and some publications are going to be more likely to be critical of Trump than others. Red State, which is a populist organization, has been against Trump since day one, and they continue to be on pretty much every issue.
So, okay, so let's talk about Comey for a second. We have, I got you follow the right-wing media more than I do, but I look a little bit. I can't help myself. And, okay, we have a group that by and large seemed to me thought Comey, well, they went back and forth. They liked him for criticizing Hillary. They were mad at him for not indicting Hillary Clinton. Then leading up to the firing, what was the right-wing view among these various factions of the right of James Comey? Before he started saying he felt nauseous about the influencing the outcome and all that, let's say going back 2 weeks, what was the landscape as far as the right-wing view of James Comey was concerned?
Sure. So I think it's helpful to think back to Hillary Clinton, and then even into Trump's wiretapping claims. So right. For the most part, the conservative media has not said that Russia should be a big concern. They are following Trump's narrative that potential collusion with the Russians is not the issue, rather a deep state in which the Obama administration was wiretapping Trump was the main issue. And so they completely dismissed that Russia is an issue. So Breitbart was coming out a couple days ago saying, listen, since Russia isn't an issue, James Comey is showing that he is not loyal to Trump. He has dismissed wiretapping. That shows that he's against us. And with loyalty prized for in the Trump camp, outlets that are going to side more with him are going to follow that narrative and say that Comey wasn't loyal enough to Trump and wasn't investigating what really matters. And so, when we're thinking about how the left is going, and even the mainstream media are going to link Comey's firing to the fact that he was really amping up investigation into potential collusion in the past couple weeks, the conservative media, by and large, ignored that. And so they're more likely to come out and say that loyalty was the issue, that Comey represents the worst of Washington because he operates in his own self-interest and is just another example of the deep state that's working to undermine the Trump administration.
I think, Leah Weintraub, this is one of the issues that a lot of people in the Democratic camp don't really understand, which is, I think a lot of people say, well, why don't Trump's supporters, for example, understand that, he's crooked and there are unanswered questions about Russia, and that firing the FBI director just raises all sorts of red flags and alarms and suggests that he's hiding something. Why don't they get it? What's wrong with these people? I think what they don't understand is that there's a whole a whole matrix, or whatever you want to call it, landscape of media outlets out there telling millions of Trump supporters that a different story, a story that to them makes sense. That says, oh, this guy wasn't loyal. He wasn't looking into all the terrible things the Obama administration did. I think you make a great point there. And so people walk away saying, well, Democrats, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. But really, this guy wasn't doing what the president told him to. So, of course, he got fired, right? Isn't that kind of the way it looks?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that the conservative media exists is to counter narratives that they think are biased towards liberals. And they think that the mainstream media is peddling a narrative just to favor liberals. And their critique is always going to come out and say that liberals are wrong. I'm thinking about a story that took hold after Comey. This is probably the most popular narrative on the right. It was about Stephen Colbert's show, where he broke news in the middle of his taping that Comey was out, and his audience started cheering because they were thinking about, his false statement about Huma Abedin, and they were thinking about how Hillary Clinton was coming out and saying that Comey was responsible for losing the election. And so they started cheering, and Colbert had to interrupt them and say, whoa, 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 guys, we shouldn't be excited about this. And so conservatives look at that story and they think, those liberals, they're just being biased by their news outlets, because of course after Colbert made his announcement, everyone started booing when they mentioned when Colbert mentioned that that Comey was out. And so there's this idea that liberals are brainwashed and that the mainstream media is controlling people, and so conservative news is the only way that they can get verifiable truths. And that allows the conservative media to spin an entirely different narrative than what we see in the mainstream media.
Yeah, it's hard for people to who aren't part of the liberal community to wrap their heads around the idea that you can think Comey was irresponsible in doing what he did before the election and may even have affected the outcome. And yet, at the same time, think a president shouldn't fire somebody 4 days after he said he was going to, ask for more money to investigate that president. It sounds contradictory. It sounds, you have to think a little bit. You have to look at the details a little bit. I get how people are thrown about that. But, Leah Weintraub, I got curious about something as we've been talking about this, which is I wonder to what extent, Trump seems to be an impulsive person and all of those things. I wonder to what extent he might have even been influenced to fire James Comey by the right-wing media. In other words, if they were out there, the Breitbarts of the world, saying, Comey isn't loyal, he contradicted our president about wiretapping Trump Tower, which was a nuts thing to say, and he's not going after the deep state, and he's persecuting the president over Russia. Is it possible that the right-wing media actually encouraged Trump to do this?
I think it's a chicken or the egg situation with Trump and the conservative media. He listens to them, they listen to him. And I think that for months now, they've each been putting forth narratives about the challenge of wiretapping, and we're really upset with Comey for dismissing those claims from the Trump camp. And so I think that there's certainly, a distaste for Comey, but I think that Trump might have been more influenced by the mainstream media in getting rid of Comey, because bringing up Russia was a very big pressure point for Trump. He did not like how much news coverage was coming out in the mainstream media. So I'm thinking the CNNs, the MSNBCs, even Fox about Russia. And he wanted to push down those narratives as much as possible. Comey was getting a lot of media attention, especially this week, and Trump didn't like it. So this might be a situation that we're looking more at the mainstream media than we are at the conservative media for influencing Trump.
Yeah, and I wonder, I read a couple articles saying that Trump was very upset at Comey's quote that he was slightly nauseous at the thought of affecting the outcome. Knowing the way Trump's mind seems to work, I think I know what Comey meant by that. I think he meant, he's not a political person. It's not a political job. It made him slightly sick to think he could have affected the who becomes president. It should have made him very nauseous, actually. But I think Trump might have taken that to mean it make me want to throw up to think that I made Donald Trump president, and that might have been the thing too. What do you think of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, for a guy who is so obsessed with his reputation and loyalty, to have someone who has an immense amount of power coming out and, saying that the election outcome made him nauseous in Trump's interpretation. Of course, it has to do with Trump, so that's what he would think. God, that would set off a lot of buttons.
Yeah, I would think so. So, what do you think is now? Obviously, this Comey thing isn't going to go away, and now there's calls for an independent investigation. Are the right-wing media going to continue to say that the liberals are making a fuss about nothing, and that the whole idea of an independent investigation of Trump and Russia or the election and Russia or both, is just a witch hunt? What are they going to say about it? That it's persecution, that it's a phony story, all of the above?
They haven't been talking much about an independent investigation thus far, and especially with Ryan and McConnell coming out and saying that, that they're siding with Trump, I think that makes it even less likely. There are certainly talkers on the right that think an investigation should take place. So Bill Krister, Charles Krauthammer, there are folks that have said, there's something fishy going on here. And I think they might use their channels to try to push for an independent investigation. But for right now, a lot of the conservative media narrative is going to, who are we going to use to replace Comey? Because they don't think that Russia is an issue. So they're not going to lean into narratives around an investigation.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right about that. And if there are calls for an investigation, or if those calls continue, I should say, I'm sure they're going to say that the pro-Trump loyalists are going to say our heroic president is being victimized and hounded. We'll have to leave it there. But thanks so much for the interview, Leo Weintraub, political communications expert and co-author of the Know Your Right newsletter. Thanks for coming on the show and talking about this with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, RJ.